So a couple days ago, Games Workshop came out with a preview for the new Deathwatch rules coming out of their supplement. In this Warhammer community article were a couple little snapshots of some of the Deathwatch rules, including a mission tactics rule that gives Deathwatch armies special control over their combat doctrines, a couple previews of their special stratagems that look very interesting. It's all very cool, and it's also not what we're going to talk about today, because today, on October 29th, a huge leak came out of the depths of the internet. A bunch of photographs were taken of pages in the Deathwatch Codex, and we're going to talk about them. What's up, folks? Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. My name is Trevi, and today we're going to be talking about these leaks coming out of the new Deathwatch supplement. This is exciting stuff, especially for me. I'm a little biased. I think Deathwatch are the coolest. I like the Special Forces Space Marines. I like that they got pouches all over them, and they're hella tactical. And I was incredibly disappointed with what came out of their Index supplement when the 9th edition Space Marine Codex released. They gutted all of the cool abilities out of Deathwatch, and hopefully we're going to see them start to come back in this new supplement. First up, we have a couple illustrations from the book, and I want to start by saying that everyone who's complaining that Games Workshop is de-grim darkifying Warhammer 40,000 and that it's too upbeat and shiny and everything looks crisp and new, go get stuffed, because this right here is an Eldar head being kept alive by a computer, and that's gross and disturbing. We're wholeheartedly in grimdark with these illustrations. I think they're very cool. We have somebody stuck a bayonet on a Tau pulse rifle and called it re-engineered Eastern Fringe artillery. Of course they would. We got some other, I don't know, a mission-capable bolt shell sanctification unit for when you need to bless your bolt shells out on the field. Also, we got a nice Vorpal asset here. The Jabberwocky would be scared. I'm going to skip through some of the pages of this leak. There isn't a lot in here, and a lot of it we have already seen elsewhere. Unfortunately, some of it is identical to what was in the Index supplement. So here are some points costs. Looks like we confirmed a Watchmaster at 125 points. That's important. Deathwatch Veterans coming in at 20 points before all their upgrades, but it looks like you can make them pretty expensive. If you go the classic Stormbolt or Storm Shield, they're going to be 27 points for a Deathwatch veteran. At 2 wounds now, though, and especially in conjunction with some of the other abilities that we have in here. Next up, we have all of the kill team rules. Now, these are identical to what's in the supplement. We have the Proteus kill team, which is the mini-marine kill team that your classic Deathwatch veterans come out of. The Fortis kill team, which is a Primaris kill team. Now, interesting thing about this that's important to note is that the keywords for these are spelled out, and it looks like they are confirmed to have these keywords. They do not, it appears, have the intercessor keyword. And that's a big deal, at least to me, because that means that they do not benefit from the rapid fire stratagem, so that you can't double shoot these guys, even if you only take intercessor kill teams. That means that you'll have to actually bring regular units of intercessors if you want to benefit from any of those specific stratagems. We have the Indomitor kill team, which includes all of the Gravis armored models. We have the Spectrus kill team, which includes all of the Phobos armored models. And interestingly, that does mean that you can no longer include both aggressors and intercessors together in the same unit. Now that they are included in the Indomitor kill team, each of the armor types is separated. That said, kill teams always have the troops battlefield role. So, while you can't stick aggressors into an intercessor squad to get your OBSEC aggressors on the cheap, you do have to combo them now with heavy intercessors. All of them will always have OBSEC. They're all going to be troops choices. And that's actually a pretty big deal. That allows you to do things like bring Reavers in as troops. You can bring Eradicators as troops. That's pretty dumb. You can have Outriders as troops. I mean, the combinations are kind of insane. Like, the level of flexibility that a Deathwatch army is going to get out of their troops battlefield role is off the chain. Obviously, this is all stuff that we knew out of the supplement, but I think it's worth talking about again. Now, this next section is actually really cool, and this is a section that was not included in the supplement and really changes how we analyze these kill team profiles. These upgrades are called the kill team specialisms, and I do apologize for the blurry picture. This looks like it was cropped out of a smaller picture, and I'm already zooming in, so if your eyes hurt, we'll just move to the next page. These kill team specialisms are basically like chapter command upgrades, but for your Deathwatch kill team units. You can pick one of these special abilities to give each of your kill teams for a special points cost, and you can only include one of each in your army. They have a set points cost regardless of the size of your kill team, so you are very much incentivized to take 10 model kill teams, and then if you want them to be 5 models, you can combat squad them into 2 smaller units. But in some situations, I think you want to keep the big ones so you can benefit from stratagems. Now, with the exception of Aquila, all of these basically do the same thing. When you select your battlefield role as a result of the Deathwatch chapter tactic, obviously Deathwatch picks a battlefield role at the start of the game, and you reroll all 1s to wound against that. Each of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kill team specializations, that is Venator, Malleus, Dominatus, Führer, and Purgatus, they will all reroll all of their wounds as long as you have selected the appropriate battlefield role to reroll wounds on. So, for example, if you have, let's talk about Purgatus. If you have selected HQ as the battlefield role to target with your chapter tactic, you reroll all your wound rolls. Now, importantly, this is not failed wound rolls, so you can reroll whatever you want. If you're trying to trigger special abilities for whatever reason, you can reroll any of the dice that your little heart desires. Additionally, if you have not picked that battlefield role as the part of your chapter tactic, they will still reroll 1s. So basically, that battlefield role has always been picked from your chapter tactic for that unit. And if you've already picked it, then you just reroll all your wounds instead of your 1s. So this is very cool. You can take very highly specialized units that are very good at killing specific things, and then in situations where that matters, that unit's going to be able to blast that unit off the table. It's going to be insane. So, by way of example, you could take an Indomitor kill team, you could take it with 5 heavy intercessors, split them off and put them on a back objective or something, and then fill out the team with 5 eradicators. They could combat squad out. You'll probably be able to teleport them. I mean, let's be real, it's Deathwatch. So you can drop them down, give them the Malleus kill team upgrade, and they reroll all of their wound rolls, or at least their rolls of 1 against heavy stuff. So that is heavy support, Lord of War, or dedicated transport. 5 eradicators with full wound rerolls is absolutely gonna kill that stuff when they shoot at it. That's going to be disgusting. Alternatively, you could take a Fortis kill team. That's the Intercessor kill team. You could fill it out with 5 Outriders, for example, split it off from the Intercessors, put those Intercessors on an objective somewhere, and have those Outriders just jam into a bunch of screening units or a bunch of chaff infantry and absolutely clear through, just a billion orc boys or whatever you're swinging at with full rerolls on those guys. Very true to the fluff. Deathwatch is going to be trying to build an army out of very specialized teams that are trying to do specific things. Now, whether or not this is going to be competitively viable, it feels a little inconsistent to me, but we'll have to see how it plays out on the table. That's another question, but the ability to upgrade a bunch of different kill teams with all of these different specializations and then pick whichever one you need at the start of the game is still very powerful. Now, the one outlier in this mechanic is the Aquila kill team. That just lets you select an additional battlefield role at the start of the game, and they always reroll 1s against that one. So instead of picking 1 to reroll 1s against and getting an additional bonus if you already have one of the existing other kill teams, Aquila just gets 2 battlefield rolls that they reroll 1s against. So it's a little bit more flexible. That might be worth taking, especially if you have like a more well-rounded kill team that can target multiple things, and you want more instances of rerolls to wound because you've already filled out the other existing kill teams. That could potentially be useful, but it feels less good to me. I should note as well that the kill team Cassius, the special character kill team, is locked into Aquila, so it already counts as being having that specialization when you bring it on the table. Now, the next new thing that wasn't included in the supplement is the Xenopurge discipline, the special discipline for Deathwatch. The psychic discipline is off the chain. This is insane. Now, obviously, just like all of the other chapter-specific psychic disciplines, you replace the Librarius discipline with this. So unless you're taking Tome of Malkador, you can't take spells from both. If you are a Phobos Librarian, you can replace the Obscuration discipline with this one as well. And typically, I think Phobos Librarians tend to do that. Now, I should mention that a lot of these powers are very matchup dependent, and so that is unfortunate because in a lot of formats, your pregame selections are limited. In a format like T5S2, you can visit tts40k.com for more info. A psychic discipline like this is very useful to have because it is a little bit more flexible, and it has a kind of a wide variety of different powers. And if you have any flex picks in your librarian build, then there are some interesting ones that you could slot in and out depending on what you're fighting. So we'll just go through the powers in order. So the first power is Premorphic Resonance. You cast it on a unit within 18 inches, Warp Charge 6, and it has a whole litany of buffs that you get until your next psychic phase. That unit hits Overwatch on a 5+. The unit fights first in the fight phase. Now, interestingly, it doesn't say that you fight as charged, and this is actually something that I misunderstood the first time I read it. It just says that you fight first, so it sounds like that if you have it cast on yourself during your opponent's fight phase, if they charge you, you will still fight first because there's no clause in there. And somebody did point out to me that any fight first ability basically counts you as being charged. So charging also gives you a fight first ability, and the two cancel out, and your opponent would pick to fight first, and it doesn't. So it's not quite as broken as I originally thought it was. But it also gives you +1 to hit in melee. So overall, a pretty decent anti-melee psychic power that gives you a lot of buffs in the fight phase. Very appropriate for Deathwatch that are trying to fight against orcs and Tyranids like that, but again, very matchup dependent. Next up, we have a big headliner for this psychic discipline, Fortified with Contempt. It gives you a 5+ damage ignore, basically a catalyst or a Delightful Agonies effect. Both of those psychic powers are almost staples in the faction that they have, and especially, 5+ damage ignore on intercessors has been sort of a problem in the meta in the past for a long, long time. That's kind of what made the Brohammer list work back in 8th edition at the end of 2019, and a lot of lists have been predicated on making intercessors very difficult to kill with combos that get that off. So, that's awesome. It is only targetable on infantry or bikers, so unfortunately you can't put it on big tanks and stuff, which is too bad. Neural Void is the next one. It goes off on a 7, so that one's a little bit tougher, and you probably need the Chief Librarian Warlord trait for +1 to cast to really reliably get it off. But it targets an enemy unit within 18 inches in visibility. It gives that entire unit -1 attack, and they can only charge the closest thing. Now, only charging the closest thing isn't that big of a deal. It does mean that you can make their charges very difficult because you can sort of intersperse units together and then they can't declare multi-charges on them. And it also means that if you're able to make a charge difficult or impossible with terrain, and then also make that unit the closest to the enemy, you can make charges potentially very difficult. But -1 attacks is a pretty big deal. Again, pretty situational because obviously, hitting 5 intercessors with -1 attack doesn't do like a ton. It's just sort of a mild inconvenience for them. But hitting like 30 orc boys with -1 attack, especially when you're stacking it on top of Fortified with Contempt or this Premorphic Resonance ability, all of those together can make your units incredibly resilient to charging enemies, and especially large units of enemies. Psychic Cleanse is the next one, and it seems okay. You roll a dice for every enemy model, not unit. It's important. Within 9 inches of the Psyker on a 6, they take a mortal wound. Honestly, just cast Smite for the most part. You have to have mathematically like 13 or 14 models within 9 inches of the Psyker for this to be better than Smite. It's still Warp Charge 6 instead of Warp Charge 5. Smite averages 2 mortal wounds. If it hits 12 models, averages 2 mortal wounds. So it's also across different units, potentially, not targeted on one unit that you want it to. So I don't know. This one doesn't seem that good. Also, if your librarian is within 9 inches of your opponent's like big beefy stuff, then you might be having a bad day. But if anything can kill big units of models, it's Deathwatch, so maybe it's okay. Mantle of Shadow is the next one, and this one is another super sweet one. It goes off on a 6 and targets a Deathwatch infantry unit within 12 inches. That unit cannot be targeted by enemy attacks or charges unless the enemy is within 12 inches of them or they are the closest eligible unit. Now, this has the prerequisite that the unit you cast it on loses the benefit if it attacks or declares a charge, but the number of actions and obviously just holding primary objectives that you need to be doing in 9th edition is insane. And a lot of times you'll have an objective that's out in the middle of nowhere. You want to go grab it with a 5-man intercessor squad or something like that, but you don't want to risk them just getting knocked off immediately by, a Lehman Russ or something across the table, and boom, you just cast a spell on them and they can't be targeted. Now, I did misread it the first time around. I thought that you just couldn't be targeted by range attacks unless the attacking unit was within 12, and so you could sort of protect your front line, but that's not how it works. If you are the closest eligible unit, then you can be targeted regardless of how far away your enemy is. So it's kind of a little bit like character protection in there as well. Being eligible is also important, so if you have stuff that's closer than the unit this is cast on, but that stuff's behind the line of sight, unless your opponent has line of sight ignoring guns, they'll be able to target them just normally. So watch out for that. There's a couple weird instances where it's not really going to protect you And a lot of people are drawing a parallel with the Ordo Xenos Inquisitor power, Psychic Veil, which goes off on a 5, but only affects Ordo Xenos units in an aura around the Psyker. This obviously doesn't require you to take an Inquisitor. It's a little bit harder to cast, and you can cast it on anything in your army, but it doesn't protect you quite as well, because you can't shoot with this one, whereas the Psychic Veil you can, and the Psychic Veil also doesn't have that 12-inch range where it can be ignored either. So there's a little give and take there, but if you don't want to put Inquisitors in your army, which I don't blame you, they're just okay, then you can just take this on your librarian, and it's sweet. The last up in the discipline is a weird one called Severance. It goes off on a 7, so it's a little tough to cast, and it targets an enemy character within 18. First off, they take a mortal wound. Great, target its might. Plinks a character for 1. That's awesome. Unfortunately, there aren't that many of these in the Space Marine disciplines, so it's hard to sort of get to the point where you can kill enemy characters with them, but putting the fear of the Emperor into them with a mortal wound is pretty nice. Additionally, until the start of your next psychic phase, you reduce the range of their aura abilities by 3 inches. And if the psychic test is greater than their leadership characteristic, they just lose their auras entirely until your next psychic phase. Now, effects like these are usually really powerful on enemy defensive auras, so things like Savior Protocols or Bodyguard that can keep their army alive and that you can then ignore during your own turn when it matters. And most of those are generated by a unit that isn't the character, and they then protect the character. So the instances in which this is going to be useful are a little bit hazy to me still. That said, it is going to be really sweet. Dropping the range of things like Rites of Battle or Tactical Precision in Space Marine armies by 3 inches so that your opponent's army has to condense harder in order to benefit from them is pretty good. Things like Harlequins have a ton of defensive aura abilities tied into a Shadow Seer, so if you're able to tag that model with this, it can be devastating to their army. A lot of leadership affecting abilities are auras on characters. So, for example, if you knock a Tyranid Synapse down by 3 inches, a lot of times you can put their forward units outside of Synapse range and make them run away to morale. In Orcs, the Breaking Heads ability is an aura ability, and this actually turns it off entirely. It reduces it to a 0-inch range, so they cannot auto-pass morale checks in Orcs. So obviously, there's a lot of really niche corner case abilities where this Severance psychic power is going to be absolutely sweet. Unfortunately, in the formats where you can't select it pregame, you probably don't take it. Your opponent has to have some very specific abilities, and because it's not guaranteed that all of your opponents would have that, you could just be wasting a very valuable psychic power slot on a librarian. Especially with this being a Warp Charge 7, you're incentivized to take a Chief Librarian with this power, and that means that those power slots are in even greater demand. So I like the idea of the ability, and I hope it sees some play. It's going to be a very tech pick in some situations, and the times when your opponent gets it off or you see somebody use it really well, it's like going to blow your mind. But again, like a lot of these powers, it is very corner case. Next up, we'll talk about some Warlord traits that were spoiled. I'm really glad that we're seeing the lists of specific Warlord traits, and we're getting a glimpse at some of the relics for Deathwatch, because they were some of the most interesting parts of the Deathwatch faction in the previous version of their supplement, and unfortunately they all got axed in the updated index. So I'm glad that we're seeing some new ones. Vigilance Incarnate lets you pick a core unit within 6 inches at the start of the command phase and a second battlefield roll to reroll ones to wound against. The most interesting thing that this tells me is that it's giving you an effect that is almost identical to the Chapter Tactic, but it doesn't count as the Chapter Tactic being active for effects like your specialized kill team abilities. I was wondering if this Deathwatch Codex would have a lot of ways to interact with the Chapter Tactic battlefield roll selection, like the 8th edition one did. There were a couple ways that you could change your mission tactic, or, move it up and down, or count it as different for different units in your army. And it looks like that's not going to be the case. Instead, you're just going to be giving straight reroll wounds against reroll ones to wound against specific battlefield rolls, but you're not actually going to change the battlefield roll that you've selected as part of your chapter tactic at the start of the game. That means that I wouldn't expect those specialized kill teams to trigger on anything but the battlefield roll that you picked at the start. So I wouldn't be hoping that there's a way that you could, swap from rerolling against troops to rerolling against heavies during the game, so you get the full rerolls against both at some point with those specialized kill teams. I don't think that that's going to be the case. This is obviously sort of the second effect that we've seen like this, the other one being the Aquila kill team specialization. They both basically have the same wording where you pick a battlefield roll and then reroll once to wound against them. It would have been easy to say that you count your that as one of the battlefield rolls that your chapter tactic has picked, and then they could sort of build things mechanically off that, but that is not what they did. Looks like they're going to be going a different direction. Paragon of the chapter gives you access to some of the chapter-specific Warlord traits. Unfortunately, it is only the chapter-specific Warlord traits out of the Space Marine book. Let's take a look at those real quick. So those are Brilliant Strategist, Deadly Hunter, Beast Slayer, Architect of War, Refusal to Die, Oath Keeper, Vigilance Incarnate, obviously for Deathwatch, Echo of the Ravenspire, Anvil of Strength, Adept of the Codex, Adept of the Omnisia, Merciless Butcher, and Speed of the Primarch. I think realistically, there are only a couple of these that you would actually want to take. A lot of them are very bad. This White Scars one, oh boy, you get a mortal wound when you charge sometimes. Sick. How fun. Brilliant Strategist to give you even more control over your combat doctrine is really good, especially given the fact that Deathwatch, as we saw in the preview article, can pick the combat doctrine that they have active each round, so you get a little bit more control over that. I think that's a very interesting combo, and there's a lot of interesting play with that. Beast Slayer for +1 to hit and wound against monsters or vehicles. Pretty good if you're building sort of a Smash Captain style captain. I like that one as well. Adept of the Codex, obviously always good. Gives you a 5+ CP regen. Maybe, in some situations, Anvil of Strength is pretty good. You can combo that one with Teeth of Terra if you're bringing a Chainsword Smash Captain. And you can get that guy up to Strength 8 if you combo it also with Imperium Sword, if there is a double Warlord trait ability in this Codex, which I assume there will be. All of the other ones have had them. Now, one thing that I do want to mention about this particular Warlord trait that I like less is that it specifies that if you have painted the heraldry of a chapter on your Warlord's shoulder pad, then you have to use that chapter. I might make a couple people mad with this hot take, but it's what I believe, so I don't know, sue me. But I don't believe that there should be ever any mechanical significance to how you paint your models. That's ridiculous to me. Come on. Like, are you serious? You're going to dictate what my color scheme is? Get out of here. I want to paint my toy soldiers green. Don't make me paint them blue. I hate this. I hate that it sets a precedent of requiring a particular color scheme on your models for if you want to play a different mechanic. I think that's garbage. And I hope that something like this doesn't show up anywhere else in the game. I hope that this is the last time we ever see any rule like this. I know in my heart that that's not going to be the case and that GW is going to pull you can only play Ultramarines if they're blue rule out of, their butt somewhere. But oh my God, I just hate it sort of so much. Nowhere to Hide is an old one that's returning, an oldie but a goodie. It lets you pick an enemy unit in your command phase and gives you a 6-inch aura that lets your core units within 6 ignore cover when they're shooting at that. That's great, especially if you're fighting against a sub-faction that has like an always-in-cover benefit, like Raven Guard. You can just always ignore that for most of your army, which is awesome. It does specify that you don't receive the benefit of cover to your saving throw. It's interesting that they're sort of retaining that wording because I think it is a little bit confusing, but that just means that you ignore light and heavy cover, basically. I kind of wish they would just say that you ignore the benefit of light and heavy cover, but it doesn't do that. So you do not ignore dense cover with Nowhere to Hide. It's just those ones that improve your saves. Optimized Priority is a really interesting one. It gives you a 6-inch aura that allows you to make ranged attacks while performing actions. So this is basically the stratagem out of the Space Marine Codex, but you get it every turn for free all the time, which is, that's pretty good. I don't know. It's pretty sweet. And especially since Deathwatch typically are incentivized to take large 10-man units of things to get full rerolls and stuff and to benefit from their +1 to wound stratagems. So being able to walk up the table with one of those big units and deploy scramblers, for example, but then also have them shoot is great. It's 2 CP to do it with the stratagem, so having it all the time with this aura is awesome. Even if you only use it once per game, it's going to cost you 1 CP to get the Warlord trait as long as you have that slot open, whereas it would cost you 2 CP to do it normally. So it's almost always a benefit. Castellan of the Black Vault is a Warlord trait that gives you a relic. Specifically, one of the relics listed, they're mostly, I think, the special issue or Orga ones: Adamantine Mantle, Artificer Armor, Mastercrafted Weapons, or Digital Weapons. Mastercrafted Weapon is the big headliner there, but the Warlord trait slot is so important. Usually you have a relic slot open, but I mean, you could potentially give this guy 2 relics. You could have, I don't know, have mastercrafted and a defensive relic also. That's kind of cool. I don't know. There's going to be some combo, some character build in there that's going to be good. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but I think it's interesting. Lastly, the Ties That Bind. This one is really good. It gives you a 6-inch aura where you can reroll failed morale tests. That doesn't really matter. You get old school, and they should know if you're back. I mean, Space Marines very rarely fail morale tests. Even when they do, it's not the end of the world because they do have a Nation no fear. So, but like we said before, you are incentivized to take larger units of intercessors than you are in a normal Space Marine army. So it's nice to have if any of those units just get absolutely gutted by shooting in one round. In addition, though, it lets you pick a unit within 6, a core unit within 6, and they get objective secured. If they already have objective secured, they count as double the models. We've seen this Warlord trait in Salamanders. It's sick. Rights of War is already in the Space Marine Codex. That's also sick, making your intercessors count as 2 models for objective secured. That's so good. That means that you can really fight against big enemy hordes. They have to dump models onto an objective to try to wrestle it away from you. I think that this Warlord trait is actually really good, and especially if you can build an army around being objective secured, and where you want to have a lot of resilient infantry that can really hold on to those objectives as long as possible. I think this is going to be awesome. We're looking pretty good for Deathwatch. We got an excellent psychic tree. We got excellent warlord traits. We also have a little sneak peek at their special secondary objectives. So they do get their own set of secondary objectives that they can use instead of the Space Marine ones. Although it does look like to me that they could use them in addition to the Space Marine ones. A little idiosyncrasy of the list construction rules in 9th edition is that you satisfy the requirements for detachment only if your detachment is made up of all of the requisite units, but none of your detachments have to just basically represent a specific keyword. So a Deathwatch detachment is also always a Space Marine detachment. So I believe that you will get access to both. You can just only take one out of each of the special secondary objective lists. Now, a couple of these are pretty bad. Shadow Operations has Cripple Stronghold, which lets your opponent pick an objective. If there's one in their deployment zone, they have to pick that, so they're incentivized to pick one that is even more difficult. And it gives you an action you can do to score points on it. It's a full round action, so you do it at the end of your movement phase, and it completes at the start of your next turn, as long as there aren't any enemies in range of that objective also. So they pick the most difficult to take objective on the table that you have to then clear entirely and perform a full round action on, which is going to be like basically on their table edge. For the difficulty of the secondary, I would expect it to complete fully after one go, and then it's like kind of an interesting pick, but no, you get 6 points. You have to do it 3 times to max it out. This is garbage. You can ignore that one. Cull Order is a very interesting one. You and your opponent both pick battlefield roles in their army, and for every battlefield role that you entirely wipe out, you get 5 points. So the way it works is that your opponent will pick one, then you will pick one, then your opponent will pick a second one. So they have more control over what you pick, which means that if their army is pretty spread between battlefield roles, they can pick 2 of the ones that are either the most numerous or the most difficult to kill. And they can have, if they pick troops and have 6 troops options and they can put 5 idiots on the back of the table, they can stop you from scoring 5 points. But on the flip side, if they only have one big tank or something, you're going to be trying to kill that tank to win the game anyway. So you're probably going to score 5 points out of that. This feels like a 5 to 10 pointer to me. I don't think you'd get 15 that much out of it. It's an interesting one, but it's competing with some other ones, so I don't know about that. Suffer Not the Alien to Live is some no mercy, no respite option. It gives you 1 point every time you destroy a Xenos unit, essentially. So Tyranids, Eldari, Orcs, Necrons, Tau Empire. I think this is really only going to be good against basically just Tau Empire. Maybe Orcs? Because Orcs, like they're smash-a-gun split, so they have a lot of individuals, but you have to kill 15 individual units to score this one. Tau Empire, because all of their tactical drones split into individual units, if they're taking the units of 2 with all of their troops options and stuff, they typically have a large count of units on the table. So a lot of times they'll have 3 infantry squads. Each of those then also bring 3 drones. Then they have 3 units of battlesuits, and each of those also bring some drones. Then they have individual tactical drone units, and we're already at our 15 units on the table. You'll mostly have to table your opponent to get the full points on this one, in which case you're probably winning anyway, but I mean, it's a fun one. It should be relatively easy to score out. Battlefield Supremacy, this one is actually kind of interesting to me. The Long Vigil. You get 5 points at the start of your command phase if there are no enemies within 6 inches of your deployment zone, and if you have one of your units wholly within your deployment zone. Interestingly, the enemy unit does not have to be wholly within 6 inches of your deployment zone. They just have to be within 6. So one dude has to tow within that 6 inches of your deployment zone. This one is going to be awesome on long table edge deployments, where it's a lot more difficult for your opponent to get in on your table edge. On the flip side, short table edge deployments usually are very aggressive, and it's sort of difficult to protect your entire deployment zone, so they're probably not going to be that big of a deal. This is sort of competing directly with engage on all fronts, I guess, which Deathwatch traditionally have been pretty good at because they can teleport a lot, so they can put a lot of units all over the table to get that engage on all fronts. But engage on all fronts is naturally less good in the short table edge deployment missions, so it's actually kind of filling a really niche role where you can pick this one instead of engage. Engage is also quite often basically just like a 10 or 11 point secondary. You very rarely max it out, and it's almost impossible to max it out, in fact, with most armies. Whereas this one scores you 5 victory points every time you complete it, so you only have to do it 3 times. You can't score it on the first battle round, unfortunately, so your opponent does get 2 turns of running at you before they're able to deny you those 5 points. But if you're playing a Space Marine army that's relatively aggressive, you can actually sort of push past that 6-inch level. You'll always have units within your deployment zone, sitting on your back objectives and stuff like that. But that said, your opponent is also might be trying to go for their own deploy scramblers or engage on all fronts, and may also be incentivized to move into your deployment zone. So I actually think that the pick of this one's going to be very interesting. And it does seem like a pretty good battlefield supremacy secondary objective to me. I think it's the best one out of this selection anyway. It's just going to take some level of skill and sort of matchup knowledge to know whether or not your opponent is going to be trying to put stuff in your deployment zone. So realistically, this is going to be the best in matchups where your opponent is going to be playing very passively and is already not incentivized to move up the table to contest this secondary objective. And in those situations, it's going to be a relatively easy 15 points. Otherwise, if your opponent is trying to deep strike into your deployment zone or move up the table very quickly, they can stop this very simply. It's not that hard. They just have in most deployments, they just have to move 18 inches up in order to stop you, and that's where most of the objectives are anyway, so they don't have to push much farther forward than those objectives. That said, I mean, you have 4 rounds to do this, so if they stop you for 1 round, it's not the end of the world. You can still complete it, and all you really need is like 1 random character in the back to complete your side of the secondary, as long as they don't contest you. So I do think that this one is actually a pretty big deal. Lastly, we get some more interesting illustrations. Looks like there's a sword made out of a Tyranid arm, maybe with a gun on it. I don't know. There's also like a alien skull, servo-skull. That's kind of cool. I would like this model, but unfortunately, that is it. So we don't know any stratagems besides what Warhammer community has spoiled already, and we don't know all the relics and any additional chapter abilities that Deathwatch might have. So I am really interested to know if the Beacon Angelus has survived the transition. That's one of my favorite relics in the entire game. Lets you pick a Deathwatch unit on the table and teleport it to your own location. It's very interesting and tricksy and cool, and I would like to see that come back, please. Also, whether or not Deathwatch retain their teleportation ability, I assume that they do. Additionally, maybe there's some stratagems that interact with those battlefield roles that you pick for your chapter tactic that could interestingly interact with these kill team specializations. We'll have to see. We just don't know yet. But I am psyched. So I hope everyone is as excited as I am about the new Deathwatch rules. I think I kind of got the rug pulled out from under me. I lost a lot of the wind in my sails at Deathwatch when the supplement came out and sort of wrecked them. And a lot of these abilities are looking pretty spicy. So I think this is going to be really a really interesting time for the chapter. So that's it for this leak, everybody. Thanks so much for watching. This video actually ended up a little bit longer than I expected. We had a lot to talk about. This was almost the entire codex, honestly. We're just missing updated data sheets for some of the special units, Watchmasters and the special characters, although I don't imagine those are going to change all that much. We're missing the stratagems, obviously, and the relics, but other than that, we almost have the entire thing. So that is super exciting. Let me know down in the comments if you are as excited about Deathwatch as I am. I hope that these rolls end up being fun and competitive, as much as they were in 8th edition, because I might pick myself up some Primaris Space Marines there and paint them black and put some tactical pouches on them. Yeah, boy. Big thanks to my patrons over at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise. As always, they're the best. You can join them and get all sorts of cool benefits like early access to videos and early access to tournaments tournament pods that we run over at the Discord server, a link for which is in the description. You can also join the membership on YouTube. You get access to some sweet badges and exclusive emojis if you want to do that as well. So I'd really appreciate any support that you could give. Thanks again for watching all the way to the end. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.